This video webinar will focus on accessing and understanding student reports. Following the workshop objectives, you'll be provided with a link to a short demo video highlighting how to access and run student reports. We will then outline the benefits of analyzing and using student reports, how to read, interpret, and discuss the student reports with students, and we'll conclude with going over how the student reports are used in the curriculum. The objectives for our workshop are to first understand how to access and print the student reports through the ClearPath portal. You'll then need to understand how to read the student reports. It's important that after the workshop, you have a firm understanding of how to interpret the student results and discuss them with a student so that you can begin coming up with ideas for strategies and interventions to implement for individual students. To use the individual student reports, you'll first need to understand how to access them through the ClearPath portal and run and print the reports. If this is a process with which you are unfamiliar, go ahead and pause the video and click on the link to watch a short demonstration of how to access and pull the reports. If you're already familiar with the process of accessing and printing student reports, continue on with the video, but know that there is a video tutorial available should you need to be reminded. When you reach the page in ClearPath that shows a list of your students with individual student report data, you can easily see whether a student's report has already been run and downloaded. If a student's report has already been accessed and pulled, you will see a gray check in the box next to his or her name. If a student's data has not yet been pulled, their checkbox will appear empty, and you'll have the option of selecting to run that student's data. You can run as many student reports as allowed based on the number of licenses available. We'll now take a look at some of the benefits of using student reports, as well as how to read the student reports. The individual analysis charts provided within your ClearPath school reports do a great job of showing which resiliency skills are strengths for specific students and which resiliency skills are weaknesses for specific students. But in certain situations, additional, more specific data is desirable to uncover even more specific root causes underlying a student's performance. For example, why might this student, who has risk profile scores in 4 resiliency skill areas, not have an at-risk index? And why does this student, who has success profile scores in 4 of the 6 resiliency skills, have an at-risk index? Individual student reports provide scores for each sub-skill contained within each resiliency skill. To illustrate this, we will look at some sample student report charts and explain how they are laid out. At the top of each chart, you'll see the overarching resiliency skill. Along the x-axis, you'll see all the sub-skills contained within that resiliency skill. The light gray bar above each sub-skill shows the student score for that particular sub-skill, compared to the dark gray bar, which is the national comparison average. The national comparison score to which your student score is compared comes from ScholarCentric's National Longitudinal Study. This is the average score of students from that study who went on to achieve academic success. It's important to note that in 2 of the resiliency skills, you actually want your student scores to be lower than the national comparison average. So for stress and well-being, the light gray student bar on the left should actually be lower than the national comparison bar on the right. You can see that this particular sample student is performing worse than the national comparison group in both stress and most of the subcategories in well-being as well. Now that we've established how to read and understand the student report data, we can discuss some helpful tips for facilitating positive discussions with your students using these reports. First, it is important to realize that some students may not respond well or become defensive if their results are presented in a way that seems like they did worse than the national comparison group. Keep the language positive. You may want to start out by identifying a relative strength or an area where they may be closest to the comparison group. Then you can lead the discussion towards areas in which they need more improvement. To keep a focused, data-driven conversation going with a student, you want to ask very pointed and sub-skill specific questions. To help with this, we will provide you with some samples for each sub-skill. Here are some questions you could ask for the sub-skill of importance of school. And questions for the sub-skill of importance of college. Under the resiliency skill of confidence, you'll find questions for the sub-skill of classroom confidence. questions for the subskill of social confidence, and questions for the subskill of test-taking confidence. For the resiliency skill of connections, you'll find questions for the subskill of teacher connections. Questions that address the subskill of peer connections, and questions that address the subskill of family support. There are a lot of subskills under the resiliency skill of well-being, which you'll find questions for the subskill of agitation, eating habits, feeling blue, sleeping problems, and physical well-being. The resiliency skill of dealing with stress has 3 subcategories, so you'll find questions of how they deal with academic stress, questions to address how they deal with social stress, and also questions targeting their financial stress. The final resiliency skill is intrinsic motivation, and you'll find questions in regards to how students find school meaningful, and questions asking why they come to school. It is also critical to understand that when implementing the Success Highways curriculum, student reports are a mandatory tool used throughout the Year 1 curriculum. These will need to be printed out prior to Lesson 4 and kept on file as they will be used throughout the Success Highways curriculum. Many lessons will begin by asking the students to analyze their scores in each resiliency subskill. You will need to distribute each student's individual reports at the beginning of each of these lessons. The students will be asked whether or not they agree with their score for each resiliency subskill, and they will need to explain their answers. At the end of each of these lessons, remember to collect the student reports back so you can keep them on file. Should you have any questions regarding student reports, direct them to your educational consultant or school administrator, who can contact a ScholarCentric service team member.